And welcome. I'm Michael Adams. I'm editor-in-chief of Hospitality Design magazine. And before I begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Walters, who have provided these terrific chairs. And Ken Schindler is in the back there with Walters, and he's our sponsor and host. And thank you very much, Ken. Now, originally for this segment, we wanted a group of people. We wanted a designer, an architect, a restaurant owner, a bon vivant, a cultural critic, any of a number of people. But we decided let's just disinvite everybody and find one person who embodies all of these things. And we did. And here's Mr. Adam D. Tihany, who needs no introduction. So we're just going to have a conversation, and leave some time at the end for you to ask some questions yourself. I suspect you'll have some. First of all, Adam, welcome.
Thank you. That was the briefest introduction I've ever had in my life.
I believe in brief introductions.
Thank you. That helps.
I'd rather hear from you than hear from myself. In looking at your biography, the 4 destinations stand out, and I wonder if you could sort of chart what each of these places meant to you in your career and your life. So we have Romania, Israel, Milan, and New York.
Bad food, with the exception of Milan and New York, but we fixed it. It wasn't like that when I first arrived in New York.
We'll get to that. Yes.
I think what it always and still does mean to me is that I am, very comfortable in cities and places that are melting pots. I mean, that everybody's a stranger and nobody's a stranger. Growing up in Israel, Israel is the classic country of immigrants, and my first stop was actually Italy from Israel, and then I came to New York. So I was struck by how homogeneous Italy was and is. And when I first came to New York, I felt right at home. It was the Tower of Babylon. Organized chaos was perfect. I loved it. I liked the colors, the people, the smells, the whole thing. So I guess this multi-national background, I wouldn't even say multi-ethnic, because that might be a little too politically incorrect, is to me, it's an advantage. I can travel, land anywhere in the world and feel curious, excited to learn something new, to see something new, and not to be intimidated by the fact that I'm a foreigner. Yes. Americans are in general, they don't travel a lot. They speak one language, they think the world speaks the same language, and they're afraid to go to places that don't speak their language. I mean, it's staggering with the kind of mobility that this country has internally. Not that many people have passports and travel. And so they're in a way, they are closed. I mean, again, there are very large countries where people don't travel because they can't afford to travel. But the exposure to other cultures, it comes from meeting people, shaking hands, eating their food, and other things.
And what about Italy fires your imagination and pleases you? And
I think that the Italians have a very strong sense of themselves. They have a beautiful, rich history and culture, particularly in the art field and in the intelligentsia and that kind of. And they love life. They truly do. And sometimes it backfires because they really seem to be, in a way, a bit superficial about certain things. But at the end of the day, the Italian if we can sit down with the legs under the table, have a good meal, drink some wine with friends, and talk about the same thing over and over again, they're happy. I love Italy. I love Italy as a country that gave me a lot of, let's put it this way, gave me a lot of spice. Would I like to live there again? I'm not so sure. After having lived in this country for over 30 years, Italy seems to be quite provincial. Again, I re-qualify. After having lived in New York for 30 years, and New York is not the United States, as you all know. It's sort of an island with a couple of bridges, and if you cut it off and put it anywhere, it's still New York. But it does make Italy look very, very staid and provincial. People are very traditional. They set on their ways. They eat the same food all the time. They dress the same way. They buy clothes. They talk about the same thing. I mean, I just want to give you a very quick statistics about Italy, and it's an interesting piece of information that has to do with food. We all love Italian food, right? You know that Italian food counts for over 60% of all food sales in the United States. Do you have any idea in billions what does that mean? It's huge. So here's a question to you. Does any one of you know how many Italian restaurants are there in Paris? Is anybody willing to take a guess? No. Why not? I'm not, it's not, you're not going to get graded on this.
Yes.
2. Now, there are over 700 Italian restaurants in Paris alone. Everybody loves Italian food, right? Okay. Question number 2. How many French restaurants in Italy? All of it. I don't even have to answer. No, it's 0. None.
Truly, really, wow.
Now, take this piece of information and think about the Italians. How advanced and adventurous and wonderful and sexy people they are, eh? I used to own an Italian restaurant in New York for 25 years. Our best customers every summer were the Italians visiting New York. 7 days a week, they were there for 7 days. 6 days, they would eat every night in our restaurant, the same table, same food. One night, they will have maybe a steak, maybe someplace, but immediately the night after, they will come and say, oh, Francesco, it was, it's okay, but we would like our pasta. So, it's an interesting point,
Yes.
Think about it. We'll get to it later in the conversation.
So when you first moved to New York, what was the status of your professional life? Were you just beginning, or was there a project that drew you there, or?
Well, I was imported, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I was. It's a long story. How much time do we have?
Well, give us the abridged version.
I'll give you the brief version. It'll take about half an hour. As you know, as we know, established already, I grew up in Israel. I did 3 years of an Israeli army, and it happened to be at the period of 1966 to 1969. Now, if any one of you are old enough or history buff to remember what happened, it was the middle of the 6 Days War. And when I joined the army, it was 2 years, and when I finished it, it was 3.5 because of the war. Now, at that point, I was 21, and the only thing I wanted to do, swear to God, is to get the hell out of there. I just had to leave. Now, the only options at the time, this was late 60s for Israelis, to study abroad, besides, bankrupting your family and going to the United States to college or to England, it was, we're looking for a college that was reasonable. There was no, state-owned and accepted Israeli students. And guess what? The only place I could come up with, and this was before internet, whatever, you had to actually read books and call people and stuff like that, was Italy. And Italy offered 2 courses for Israeli or foreign students with Israeli descent. One was veterinary medicine in Bologna, and 2 was architecture in Milan. Now, I did know that I didn't want to be a veterinarian. And that was basically all I knew about architecture, that I did not want to be a veterinarian, so I ended up in Milan. So I go from Tel Aviv, from Jerusalem, which I don't know if anyone has been to Jerusalem here? Okay, please leave right now. It is the most beautiful place on the planet, with the most incredible weather, with the most unbelievable light and no pollution. Okay? Has anybody of you been to Milan? Bravo. I land in November of 1969 into a glass of milk. It was fog, you couldn't see a thing. I mean, I don't know how this thing landed even. I thought we were still up in the clouds when this guy hit the floor. And we get off. The weather was horrific. It was polluted to the max. My eyes were watering, and it was 1969, November. Now, none of you were born then, but in 1968, something happened in Italy, and it was in France, actually. It was the student revolt, the Red Summer in Paris, which absolutely destroyed all schools in Europe, and everybody was running around with green jackets, red scarves, avanti popolo, communism, and so on. And no student, no faculties, no anything. It was just chaos. Now, I came from 2.5, 3 years in the Israeli army, so I knew how to do guerrilla warfare. I was good, actually. And the first day that I go to school to register, I stand in line, and in 5 minutes, I start to hear sirens and tear gas and bombing and everything. And kids are running around, in disarray and so on. I said, what is this? I know how to do, what to know when they shoot at you. I mean, this is my specialty, you duck. So I go outside, and there are these police trucks. And I said, well, sitting in a police truck is a safe place. I sit down. An hour later, they pack up all the students, and we go to the police station. Now, I do not speak a word of Italian. I actually knew ciao, pasta, and buongiorno. I find myself in line again in front of the clerk there, the police guy, and people are registering. And what was striking to me, that everybody's name was Carlo Marx. Men, women, children, everybody was Carlo Marx. Finally, I get to this guy, says Adam Tihany, and he looks at me, and he says, and I said, passaporto. So now, hand gestures. You've been to Italy? Right. You know what this means? This, in a short version, no? In Israel, what this means is 1 minute, please. So he's asking me for my passport, and I look at this guy and I go. And he says, ma che cosa fai? And I go, momento, no? And well, to make a long story short, I end up in handcuffs in the Israeli embassy as one of those perverted, subversive creatures. Sure. And that was my start in Italy. And but I'm telling you the story because it all leads up to his question. I asked you how much time you have, so Well, to make a long story short, I discovered that if you can't go to school to study in Italy, you have to do an apprenticeship. So I started working with some people, and lo and behold, there was no work in architecture at the time. Country was poor, there was no, so every architect did whatever they could do. They did graphics, they did packaging, they did furniture design, and hence, what as the Italian style was all born at the time that I happened to be there. And so the education was such that an architect or a designer can do everything. And you can control the image, you can control the product, you can control everything as long as you give it some consistency and creativity and new materials and so on and so forth. So in 1973, there was a big exhibit at the Museum of Modern Art in New York called the New Domestic Landscape, organized by Emilio Ambas at the time, who was a curator, and he was the introduction of Italian design to the United States. And I happened to work in a design firm that did one of these exhibits. So the exhibit was a huge success, and an American company came to Italy to look for a designer to bring to New York that can package this Italian design look and make it their own. And it was a company that doesn't exist for quite some time. They were in the contract furnishing business. And they came, as one of their stops was our office, because they came to visit all the different offices that participated in this exhibit. And, you know, this guy, Stanley Morris, walks in and he says, you know, we would like to find an Italian designer and bring him to New York.